Yes, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before I turn to you, I'm going to turn to the members of the school committee first to see if they have any questions. Carly?
I don't at the moment. I wanted to just thank you for your very thorough presentation. The only question I had coming in was about when we were talking about positivity rates within the community and testing and how we were going to manage and kind of mitigate that, but it sounds like that'll be forthcoming. Yep. That was my concern. How are we going to be able to assess the positivity rate if we're not testing and things like that? So I'm looking forward to that information. Thank you.
Community-wide, the positivity rate comes from the Department of Health. Right. That's not data we gather, but the Department of Health gives us.
Thank you.
Nikki, Mrs. Pfeiffer? Yeah, I think it would be helpful for the public to understand why every year we obviously send in physical forms to the school nurses, who I'm pointing at because they're right there, about our kids and what vaccinations they've had and their, you know, when they've had their physical exam. But I gather that a COVID vaccination cannot be part of that physical form. And you mentioned some difficulties about some of these areas because obviously you don't know who's vaccinated and who isn't. So how do you know who to quarantine and for how long and all of that? Right. But it cannot be part of that physical form. Correct?
Right. We cannot. I'm sorry. Yeah. There's someone in the audience who knows this a lot better than I do.
When those forms were developed historically, we didn't have COVID. So there's no block for COVID. But I have received physicals where the physicians have written it on the side. The other thing that can happen is we can reach out to parents and ask them to provide dates. We can also, the school nurses, we can reach out to parents and ask them, if they say to me, well, Ellen, he got one in May and he got one in June, but I can't remember the dates. Do I have your permission to check the site and get them? And we can do that. Can we, the other time in the guidelines we received when we were in school last year about vaccinations, we can't go fishing. That's what I call it, a fishing expedition. But if there's a case in a classroom and we need to know who in the circle was vaccinated, we have to provide that information to the Department of Health. So in that case, for quarantine purposes, we can look up vaccination. If a kid says, I got some shot, but I don't know what it was, which they do. Sorry. So yes, there's a way to do it. We're hoping that everybody who's out there, we're hoping that you'll let your school nurse know if your child's been vaccinated. It will help a lot to get our statistics and to see if we can push ourselves to that almost 70% mark.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So there is some benefit to you potentially for letting your school nurse know because it means your child is less likely to be quarantined if they're a close contact. Okay, that was my only question. And the other thing is, so I'm not clear on what your recommendation is about face masks.
Sure. So I expect the policy we bring you back next week will have a tiered implementation where the requirement for face masks is linked to the positivity rate in the community in accordance with the CDC guide.
Got it. Thank you. That's it for now. Erin?
I just had, thank you for that presentation. I had a couple of people write into me that just want clarity on whose decision this is and what it will, you know, who this will ultimately come down to. And I know we'll be voting on it as a school committee, but I think it's a good question because I think it's always been complicated when you think about mandates versus recommendations and things like that.
So are you asking me, or is that?
Yeah, I'm asking you if you wouldn't mind to let the public and all of our community members, school committee members know what.
So as to my legal authority, I see someone else inching closer to her microphone.
Thank you. Peter.
Last year when we were going through this, if you recall, it got to school starting and the superintendent actually in his letter to the district and to the parents put in that masks were required. That was before the state came out requiring masks. Mr. Hicks actually called me this morning and asked me if he had that authority. And what I told him is that I would do some research and look into it for this year.
Erin, are you on that? I have a couple of questions. It's important to me that the children are in school every day. And it's important to me that we don't end up with students who are quarantined because of a possible close contact. Very important to me, because I think that our children missed enough school last year already, and I don't think that they can afford to miss any more. The second thing is, if you start with masks, there has to be an end date. There has to be a reason not to wear them anymore. And I speak for that because, as I spoke to you earlier today, when we were younger, our parents might have gotten a note from the school saying that someone in our class had the measles as a heads up, but we still went to school every day. And we didn't stay home because somebody had the measles. So that's why I'm looking at what is it that it's going to take, or maybe we don't have the answer, or maybe we don't start at all. I haven't completely. Guys, I told you. But I am interested in seeing how that's going to play out. You said quarterly, but I'm concerned that we'll get through this variant, and then another one will come, and another one, and another one, and we'll never get out from behind being afraid of exposing ourselves to illness that we expose ourselves to every day. So that's what I'm going to be looking for next week, is some sort of, you talked about it, a tiered plan, but a plan that gets us out of this as quickly as possible. So that's just my comment on the thing. Thank you. Tara.
So I have a couple of questions. The revisiting was one of them, so I would. Sorry. I also have no voice. I've been yelling at children all summer. So the revisiting question was one of my questions. So if we were to not choose to make it mandatory, or if we were, how would we evaluate that, and when would we evaluate that? My second question is recess and outdoor gym. You didn't address that in this presentation. And I know that at the end of the school year, the children were allowed to go outside without masks. So I want to know what if it were to be mandatory, what would that look like for recess and gym? My other question would be data from the 2021 school year. So we've collected, we've tested, we've quarantined, we've done a lot in the last 9 months. Can we have that data? Can we have it collected and coordinated? How many classrooms did we end up quarantining? Were there classrooms that were quarantined more than once? What did we do for virtual learning? How many days were some of the classes out? How many kids tested positive? I know that we tested every athlete every week. How many of those athletes got tested and tested positive? Percentage-wise. So I'd like to see data on what we already have done in the last 2021 school year. I also am curious if, because I know that I received a lot of emails. I apologize. I have not had a chance to read them. But I did notice that a lot of elementary school parents are worried because their children do not have the ability to be vaccinated. Is there consideration for partial? If we were to go to mandatory, is it partial or is it all or none? So could you do secondary because those children have the ability to be vaccinated. So I'd like to see a possible plan if that is the case, elementary, secondary. And then my other question is distance learning. So whether you be a person who doesn't feel safe with your child being in school if people are not masked, or whether you don't feel that you would like to send your children to school being masked. What is our plan? I know I spoke to the Department of Education today. They said it is not mandatory, but they did say that school committees can make the choice to bring on virtual learning. So I want to know what is our plan, because whether you are on one side of the story or the other, I think people feel strongly on both ends. And so what is our plan? I know that we talked about no virtual learning, but I don't think at this moment we can completely close that door. So what would the cost be for us? What would our options be? What would that look like? And those are my questions.
I can address some of them now.
Okay.
If that would help. I'll try and go backwards. What is in our planning right now is distance learning would only be available in cases of something like medical fragility, where it was a medical necessity. It was not any intention. I'm sorry for not mentioning outdoors. Any plan that comes forth from us would be an indoor plan and would not affect students outdoors. And it is, what's the way out of it? So I think my thinking is that infection rates are the way out of it. That's it.
We can't hear you at all.
Sure. I'm sorry. My thinking is that the positivity rate is the way out of it. As the positivity rate comes down, the need for masking goes away.
I have one question on that, and I only worry because Warren has 3 or 4 nursing homes, and Bristol has a few as well. And I know that with the infection rates, that the only thing that makes me nervous with that is that if it gets into one of those locations, does that affect us, and how does that affect us? Can we really judge the whole community on convalescent sites?
So I don't know whether or not Bristol and Warren have more nursing home sites per capita than other communities. I don't know that. I only have the data from the Department of Health. I don't have our data from last year. I'll do what I can to get that for you. My concern is that it's a kind of a binary thing. It hits you or it doesn't. And because it hasn't hit you is not a guarantee that it won't hit you. So I'm thinking about.
Excuse me, Mr. Hewitt, we're not interrupting the people speaking here. Well, that's not my problem for you, Peter. I can hear them, and this gentleman here, please, we'll get to you, I promise. But if you can't hear, move your chair up.
So I'm sorry, I can get you historical incidence rates for the communities. That is evidently available. I had thought you were asking for the rates for the testing we did in school.
No, I am asking for.
Okay, then I
so
did
I'm
interpret
asking for
correctly.
because I know that we've acquired a lot of data.
Yeah.
In the having athletes, they were tested every week, and then we had many students and parents that opted for that as well.
Yep.
So I want to look at that because that was a whole year of information, and how did it affect us, and what did we see? Were our infection rates high? So that we also can monitor when we look at this year, is it different? Again, this is not going to go away, and how do we live with it?
Sure.
But I do want to say, because when I did speak to the Department of Ed, every child is required to get a public education or have access to a public education. So even though at the moment we have said we are not doing virtual, I would like to look at what the cost would be and what we would be able to present.
Sure.
Thank you. Sheila?
Thank you. So one of the questions I have, Tara and Marge pointed out a lot of them, so I'm not going to repeat them, but is it said if they're quarantined, if a classroom is quarantined, because this one says within 6 feet, if we're saying we're going to do the classes at 3 feet, will the whole class get quarantined if it's what it kind of sounds like?
Yes, that could mean that, yes.
Okay, so if they get quarantined and they return on day 8, let's just say, does that mean they miss 8 days of class?
Yes, that's what it would miss, yes. Well, they're not in school for those days. They're not in school.
So they don't
until
get
the 8th
distance
day.
learning? Sorry, this is kind of...
So we would do educational programs for them. They would not be without educational programs. We would do the Google Classroom and everything.
But they won't have access, because I'm just asking, because my 2 sons were quarantined multiple times and they didn't have, like they couldn't log into a teacher, like they just had to go into Google Classroom and I had to help them, which I work full time, which is a nightmare. So I didn't know if there's gonna be like an option that if a whole class is quarantined, like can they, if the teacher's quarantined, they're quarantined, can they log in with the teacher and distance learn?
That's something that we hadn't specifically talked about. I will bring that back next
Yeah,
time.
because from a parent that their kids were
Yep.
quarantined all the time. The other question I had is mask breaks. So I know that we say we do mask breaks, but having children in the district, that didn't happen unless at the middle school they had a sub and that sub would take them out because they know they needed them. I just feel that if this is really, if you end up being the decision maker and we're out of it, I just feel like mask breaks are needed. And I know people have, on both sides, have, you know, it doesn't affect kids, but it most certainly does. And it does have a huge social emotional impact as well as health impact to these kids to have them on for 6 hours. And remember, the majority of our schools are not AC'd in the summer. And it does get hot. So I feel that that is imperative. And just the reevaluation and the constant moving. And I think just for the record, I mean, I don't understand how, and it's not you, and I know, Marianne, you're looking into it, but there's not one person within this 9 who is medically qualified to make this crazy decision. And I just feel like, I mean, being a parent, and I understand both sides, and I've gotten probably 200 emails on both sides. I understand it, but at the same sense, we're not medical professionals, and I'm doing research just like everybody else is doing research, and I just think that this is completely insane, even to put it on you. And it is recommended, but it doesn't mean that it's mandated. And I think that's the big key.
I didn't ask to have to make this decision, yeah. I don't think any of you did.
No, ladies and gentlemen, I keep putting my hand up, but this part of the meeting is to ask these kinds of questions so that the superintendent can come back next week with the answers, rather than putting him on the spot right now and trying to come up with something. And hopefully we're asking questions that all of you have as well, so that you'll feel comfortable that we are doing our due diligence about our students. Karen, did you want to speak?
Sure. I just have a question about cleaning and the disinfection. So it says here, you know, clean and disinfect immediately when someone is sick. So that's kind of a broad term. I know we do have specific symptoms associated with COVID, which seems to be just about everything under the sun these days. But if one of the kids has a sore throat versus somebody's vomiting versus somebody has a fever or they sneeze, or how are we going to weed through all this? Do we have, I'm looking at you guys over there.
Looking at Ellen.
Oh, there's Julie too. Do we
Are
have
you looking at
anything
me?
to follow? Yeah, do we have a protocol?
First of all, can you hear me in the back of the room? Can you hear me? Thank you. Yes, we do. We will follow the same guidelines. So you look at the probable case symptoms, and we will follow the same guidelines. What will be different this year is that with parent consent, we can do symptomatic Binax testing before we send a child home. And then then if that comes back negative, we would recommend anyway, you check with your PCP, your pediatrician, whoever you use, and then you go further for PCR testing. But we will have to follow the same guidelines that if it's a probable case symptom, that we're going to need to send children home to be tested or seen by their doctor.
Okay, and I don't think, I'm not asking you this question because I know you have to know a lot of other things, but as far as like custodians and disinfecting, like sore throat is on the list, right? For
So you're talking about in regards to cleaning?
disinfection of the.
No, the area that would be cleaned would be, so if you, Mrs. Cabral sent a student to me because you thought that they were coughing too much and they were complaining of a runny nose and they're in my space, then I would have to have a custodian come down after that person left, or I would clean it myself and clean that area that they were at. If it were to be a positive case, that would change how the disinfecting gets done. But just a regular sore throat and a runny nose, we don't have to bring out the big guns to start cleaning everything down. Is that what you're asking?
But the student would go home. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
just worried about interrupting class time every time, for disinfection purposes. Are the kids needing to leave the classroom for disinfection? And
I don't think, that's not my understanding. My understanding is if it's a positive case, the nurses' space would be treated differently. Okay?
all right, thank you. Appreciate it, Ellen.
Are you done?
Not really, but I'll be done.
You can ask all the questions you want.
No.
Okay,
I'm all
Sarah.
set. Thank you.
Sarah,
I actually-
I can't hear.
Well, I haven't really said anything yet. No. So I actually had a couple of really good questions sent in to me by email by a constituent about our possible liabilities with regard to the basic education program and also insurance and liability coverage. I don't know if we've considered those things. If the school district disregards the recommendations of national and state health agencies for safely protecting kids against COVID, and accordingly children with underlying health conditions are unable to attend school, might we be in violation of regulations in the basic education plan? Along those same lines, if districts decide not to follow CDC guidance, should we consult with our insurers regarding risk assumption and liability coverage? Insurers may be unwilling to cover liabilities created as a result of failure to adhere to public health guidance.
Did you understand that?
Yes, I can only say that I haven't spoken to our insurance company about that. I mean, they're coming to see me next week. I can ask them about that. I have felt personally about that. And I asked myself, should there be an outbreak and should there be adverse impacts? I know if I had recommended to you not following CDC guidance and then there were adverse consequences for that, I don't know how I could sleep at night. I mean, I feel responsibility for every child who comes to school here. So that is one of the things that weighs on me. So I think about that from my personal standpoint. But it also is a viable question as far as insurance and the like as well. But I do not have any information on that.
Was that what you wanted to?
Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. All right. Yes, Mr. Cabral.
And I'll leave my mask on. Bob, I believe that anybody who has not been vaccinated should wear a mask. That's my opinion. Anybody who has been vaccinated, it's up to the parents to decide on that case. My question to you is, when a student comes in and says, I'm not going to wear a mask, what do we do, and what would the penalty be for that student?
So I don't know what consequences you had last year. I mean, theoretically, that student should not be in class without a mask on. We would ask for the student to go home, or first thing we would do is provide the student with a mask, or ask the student to go home. But if we have a mask requirement, then I think that's a requirement that we need to be sure that everyone fulfills, and you cannot have students in school without masks if you have a mask requirement. Otherwise, you have a choice requirement. You either have a mask requirement or you don't. So selective enforcement would be and would make the requirement meaningless. I would not be an advocate of suspending students or anything like that, because we want students in school. So but I would be an advocate for you need a mask, we'll give you a mask.
Or how about if we have them tested, or could they then not wear a mask?
Can you say again?
Yeah, suppose we send them to be tested and they come out negative. Could they then come to school without a mask?
Then I think that would open up a can of worms that I don't know how we would answer. But we also know that even if you've been vaccinated, you can still be a carrier and still spread it to other people, even though you don't get sick.
All right, thank you.